Before Marie Curie was a Nobel Prize winner, she was just Maria Sklodowska, a girl growing up in a country that didn't even exist on the map. Poland had been carved up by empires, and the slice she lived in was under the tight, cold grip of the Russian Empire. And under Russian rule, education was a threat, especially for girls, and especially for Polish girls. But Maria didn't get the memo. She was already the kind of person who reads scientific textbooks like they're romance novels. Dangerous behavior in the eyes of an authoritarian regime. At school, she was brilliant, top of her class, memorizing everything like her life depended on it, because honestly, it kind of did. But once she graduated, the doors slammed shut. Universities in Poland didn't admit women. So what did she do? Oh, nothing much, just joined an illegal, underground university known as the Flying University. Yeah, that's real. It moved locations constantly to avoid the Russian secret police, and its students, mostly young women, studied math and physics by candlelight like they were plotting a revolution. In a way, they were. But brilliance doesn't pay rent. Her family was broke. Her father had lost his job for being too pro-Polish. Her mother had died of tuberculosis when Maria was 10, and now it was up to her and her sister Bronia to lift the family out of poverty. That's when the sisters struck a deal that feels ripped from a 19th century buddy drama. Maria would work as a governess to fund Bronia's medical school in Paris, and once Bronia made it, she'd help Maria follow. So off Maria went to a wealthy estate to raise other people's children, and here's where things get spicy. She fell in love with the eldest son of the family. It was sweet. It was hopeful. It was doomed. His parents said absolutely not. A poor Polish tutor? Marry down? Over their dead aristocratic bodies. Maria was heartbroken, crushed in a letter-reading on-it-soaked hill kind of way. But she didn't let it stop her. She threw herself back into her science with a quiet, steely rage. And when the time came, years later, Bronia made good on her promise. At 24, Maria packed a trunk and a dream and boarded a train to Paris alone, underfed, underdressed, and fluent in 3 languages. She stepped onto the icy streets of the Latin Quarter with just enough money for tuition and not much else. She was about to become Marie Curie. By the time Marie Curie stepped off the train in Paris, she had already survived political oppression, personal heartbreak, and the intellectual lockdown of a country that told her women didn't belong in science. But the City of Light wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet either. Marie enrolled at the Sorbonne, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and almost immediately realized the dream came with a catch. She was broke, freezing, and completely alone. She rented a tiny attic apartment so cold in the winter that she had to wear every layer she owned just to study, without her fingers going numb. Her meals were a rotation of bread, tea, and sometimes nothing. More than once, she fainted from hunger in the lecture hall. But here's the twist. Even starving, she dominated every class. While her classmates, mostly men, came from wealthy families and well-fed backgrounds, Marie outscored all of them. Physics, math, chemistry, she didn't just pass, she crushed. Professors started whispering about that Polish girl. Not in a condescending way, in a this might be someone history remembers way. But let's be real, it wasn't just brilliance. It was obsession. She didn't go to balls. She didn't flirt at cafes. She lived in the lab and the library. And while other students had friends or lovers or at least some sense of balance, Marie had one thing: data. And that's exactly what brought her into the orbit of Pierre Curie, the man who would become her scientific soulmate and husband. Pierre was quiet, awkward, and laser-focused on his work in magnetism and crystals. Not exactly the life of the party, but when he met Marie, something clicked. She wasn't impressed by Parisian charm or academic titles. She was interested in the work. That's what Pierre loved most about her. And Marie? She found in him someone who finally treated her like an equal, not a curiosity, not a woman in a man's world, but a partner. Their courtship was practically made of chalk dust and lab fumes. No candlelit dinners, no romantic strolls through Montmartre. Just endless conversations about energy, matter, and what might lie at the heart of the atom. He proposed. She hesitated. Not because she didn't love him, but because she had work to do. Science came first. Always. But eventually, she said yes, on her terms. They married in a civil ceremony with no wedding dress, no ring, and a mutual vow that their life would be devoted to science. And then came the obsession that would define them both: radioactivity, a word that didn't even exist yet. At the time, scientists were buzzing about this strange new phenomenon: invisible rays emitted from certain elements, most famously uranium. Marie was fascinated, but instead of just reading about it, she went after something new. She believed, without much to go on, that there had to be other, more radioactive elements out there. Things no one had seen before. And if anyone could find them, it was her. So picture this: Marie Curie, now a young wife and mother, working in a broken-down shed behind a school. No ventilation, no safety gear, smashing pitchblende, a toxic, uranium-rich rock, with a steel rod like she was mining for ghosts. She stirred steaming vats of chemicals for hours at a time, exposing herself to radiation levels we now know were dangerously high. Her hands cracked. Her clothes were stained. Her health began to quietly deteriorate. But she wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. And then boom. Polonium, named after her homeland, Poland. A scientific mic drop in the middle of the Parisian elite. Not long after, radium followed, more radioactive than anything anyone had ever seen. She and Pierre had done it. They had discovered two brand new elements. But did the world celebrate her? Not quite. When the discoveries hit the scientific community, there was a rush, and not the good kind. The Nobel Committee considered awarding Pierre the prize for the work alone. It wasn't until he intervened and insisted that Marie had led the research that they added her name. It was the first time in history a woman had ever been nominated. She didn't just earn it. She fought for it, with data, evidence, and relentless grit. Marie and Pierre Curie were the scientific equivalent of a rock star power couple long before those were even a thing. Together, they weren't just discovering new elements. They were shaking the very foundations of science and challenging everything the world thought it knew about matter, energy, and the invisible forces that govern life itself. Their discovery of polonium and radium made headlines, but it wasn't all confetti and fanfare. The two worked in a cramped, freezing shed behind the School of Physics and Chemistry in Paris. Imagine no heating, no fancy equipment, and mountains of glowing, radioactive ore that no one understood, or knew how dangerous it was. But Marie and Pierre were obsessed, almost possessed by their work, working day and night, often too exhausted to eat or sleep properly. Then came the bombshell. In 1903, the Nobel Prize in Physics was announced. The award was a huge deal. This was the recognition every scientist dreamed of. And the announcement shook the academic world. The Nobel was to be shared between Pierre Curie, Henri Becquerel, who first discovered uranium rays, and Marie Curie, the first woman ever nominated for a Nobel Prize. But hold on, it almost didn't happen. The physics community was deeply skeptical of Marie's role. Many believed she was just Pierre's assistant, a footnote to his genius. When the Nobel Committee first considered the award, it was only Pierre and Becquerel on the list. It took Pierre's insistence, yes, he demanded she be recognized, for Marie to be included. Imagine that. A man fighting to get his wife's name on an award that she had earned just as much, if not more. When the Nobel ceremony finally arrived, the couple traveled to Stockholm, walking side by side, not just as husband and wife, but as pioneers rewriting the rules of science and society. The press buzzed with fascination. The modest Polish woman who rose from poverty to challenge the male-dominated halls of science. But with fame came pressure, and a world that wasn't quite ready for a female scientific superstar. The Curie name became synonymous with radioactivity, a word that was soon everywhere, from academic journals to newspaper headlines. Scientists were eager to explore radium's mysterious powers, and businesses began marketing radium-infused cosmetics, health tonics, and even radium water. Yes, people literally drank it, believing it was magical. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Marie, however, never lost sight of the real stakes. She knew radium's power could revolutionize medicine, especially cancer treatment, but she also knew it was dangerous. She treated it with a mix of reverence and caution that few understood at the time. Behind closed doors, the Curies were also navigating their personal lives. They had 2 daughters, Erin and Eve, and Marie balanced motherhood with scientific obsession. It wasn't easy. Many days were a blur of experiments, household chores, and public appearances. Pierre was supportive, but also wary of the attention their discoveries were drawing. It was the beginning of a whirlwind life neither had fully anticipated. And then tragedy struck. In 1906, Pierre was killed in a freak accident, struck by a horse-drawn carriage on the streets of Paris. Overnight, Marie was transformed from partner in science to widow. But instead of retreating, she stepped forward into the spotlight with a fierce determination. She took over Pierre's teaching position at the Sorbonne, becoming the first woman to teach there, and doubled down on her research. Her grief and resilience made headlines. The press, which once questioned her legitimacy, now celebrated her as a symbol of strength and brilliance. But the world wasn't done throwing curveballs. As Marie rose higher, whispers and rumors began swirling around her personal life, a scandal that threatened to destroy her reputation and overshadow her groundbreaking work. The moment Pierre Curie died, the world watched Marie transform from a brilliant partner in science to a grieving widow carrying an empire of radioactive discovery on her shoulders. But what followed wasn't just a story of sorrow. It was a scandal that shook Parisian society to its core and threatened to tear down everything she'd built. Pierre's death in 1906 was sudden and shocking. A quiet afternoon on a rainy street, a lost footing on the pavement, and a speeding horse-drawn carriage changed everything. The man who was her partner, her confidant, her scientific equal, was gone. Overnight, Marie was left alone with 2 young daughters and the relentless pressure of continuing their work. And the world expected her to keep moving forward, not just as a widow, but as a trailblazing scientist in a field dominated by men. Stepping into Pierre's role at the Sorbonne, Marie became the first woman ever to teach there. This was historic, yes, but it also came with an onslaught of public scrutiny. Some colleagues welcomed her, others resented her. The spotlight wasn't always kind. The media started watching her every move, no longer just a scientist, but a woman with a story to sell. And sell it they did. The press soon unearthed something from her past, her relationship with Paul Langevin, one of Pierre's former students. Langevin was a brilliant physicist in his own right, but there was a catch. He was married. Their affair became the tabloid scandal of the decade. Newspapers splashed lurid headlines about Marie Curie's love life, in ways that were less about facts and more about salacious gossip. Parisian society turned against her almost overnight. She went from revered to reviled. Her scientific achievements were overshadowed by whispers of betrayal and impropriety. There were even calls for her to be stripped of her honors. The scandal didn't just threaten her career, it threatened her daughter's future and her very place in the scientific community. But Marie Curie wasn't one to back down. Behind the headlines, she kept working, hiding the pain, the exhaustion, and the relentless attacks on her character. She poured herself into her research with a fierce resolve, determined that her discoveries would speak louder than the rumors. Meanwhile, Langevin's wife publicly denounced Marie, and the couple's private life was dissected in every café and salon in Paris. Letters were leaked, private details exposed, and Marie was forced into a humiliating public defense of her actions. The scandal wasn't just personal, it was political. Anti-Semitic and sexist undertones fueled the attacks. Some critics dismissed Marie not just because of the affair, but because she was a foreign woman who dared to succeed where French men dominated. The tabloids played into stereotypes, painting her as a dangerous outsider. Still, even as the world turned against her, Marie's scientific reputation was rising. In 1911, despite the ongoing scandal, she was awarded her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her work isolating pure radium. It was a rare triumph, the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. But even that victory was bittersweet. The Nobel Committee refused to attend the ceremony in Stockholm, and she was shunned by much of the scientific elite. The media continued to mock and belittle her. The personal attacks were relentless, but she stood her ground. Through tragedy, heartbreak, and scandal, Marie Curie emerged not just as a survivor, but as a legend. The woman who once was denied education by an empire had rewritten the laws of nature and society, and no scandal could erase that. After the storm of scandal and heartbreak that nearly tore her apart, Marie Curie didn't just survive. She rose again, more determined and more brilliant than ever. If Paris had tried to bury her beneath gossip and judgment, she answered with discovery, resilience, and a legacy so powerful it would echo through history. The year was 1911. Marie Curie was no stranger to hardship by then. She had lost her beloved Pierre, endured a public scandal that shattered her reputation, and faced cold shoulders from the scientific community and the press. But with all the odds stacked against her, she was about to make history once more, this time alone, without Pierre by her side. Marie was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for isolating pure radium, a monumental achievement that took years of painstaking, exhausting work in her tiny, makeshift laboratory. This wasn't just a repeat win, it was an emphatic statement. She was the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields, a feat no one had dared to dream of. But even this moment of triumph wasn't the grand, glamorous celebration one might imagine. The same scientific establishment that lauded her work snubbed her at the awards ceremony. Many prominent scientists refused to attend the banquet because of the lingering scandal. The press, instead of focusing on her genius, still whispered about her past, as if her discoveries somehow paled next to tabloid rumors. Yet Marie's gaze was fixed firmly ahead. She knew that the real impact of her work wasn't the prize or the headlines, but the future she was building, a future where science could save lives and women could hold power in laboratories long dominated by men. Her fame, however, was undeniable. Across Europe and America, she became a living legend. Scientific societies, universities, and governments sought her out. She traveled to the United States in 1921 for a fundraising tour to buy radium for her lab, and she was treated like royalty. President Warren G. Harding personally handed her a gram of radium, and crowds lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the miracle woman. During this tour, Marie wasn't just collecting funds, she was building bridges between science and society. She spoke about the potential of radium to cure cancer and transform medicine, inspiring doctors, researchers, and everyday people alike. But even as the public adored her, Marie remained deeply private, often uncomfortable with the celebrity spotlight. Back in her laboratory, Marie's work continued to push boundaries. She pioneered research into the effects of radioactivity on living cells, laying the foundation for radiation therapy that would later save millions of lives. During World War I, she turned her attention to practical applications, developing mobile X-ray units, nicknamed Little Curies, that could be brought to the front lines to diagnose injuries and save soldiers' lives. Marie personally trained teams of women to operate the machines, breaking yet another gender barrier. She knew the power of knowledge and was fiercely committed to sharing it, even as her own health quietly declined from years of radiation exposure. Despite her incredible accomplishments and growing global admiration, the toll of years working with radioactive materials was devastating. Marie suffered from chronic illnesses, fatigue, skin burns, and mysterious ailments that modern science now knows were caused by prolonged radiation exposure. But she rarely complained, hiding her pain behind a steely resolve. Still, her daughters watched their mother with awe and concern. Irin followed in her footsteps, becoming a scientist herself and eventually winning a Nobel Prize alongside her husband for work on artificial radioactivity, proving that Marie's legacy was not just personal but generational. Marie's younger daughter, Eve, chose a different path, becoming a writer and journalist who would later publish one of the first biographies of her mother, a testament to the complexity and humanity behind the myth. Marie Curie's later years were a mixture of honor and quiet suffering. In 1934, she passed away from aplastic anemia, a disease linked to her prolonged exposure to radiation, a tragic price for a life spent illuminating the unknown. Her papers and notebooks are still radioactive today, stored in lead-lined boxes as a chilling reminder of her sacrifices. But death couldn't dim her light. In 1995, Marie Curie was finally laid to rest in the Pantheon in Paris, the first woman to be honored there on her own merits. Her legacy isn't just in the glowing elements she discovered or the prizes she won. It's in the doors she shattered for women in science, the treatments she made possible, and the relentless spirit she embodied. From a Polish girl denied education to a global icon of resilience and brilliance, Marie Curie's comeback story is one for the ages, proof that true genius, combined with courage and grit, can defy even the darkest storms. Marie Curie's life was a blazing comet, bright, fierce, and utterly transformative, but even the brightest stars eventually burn out. Behind the awe-inspiring discoveries and the headlines glorifying her genius, there was a hidden cost that no one fully understood during her lifetime: the devastating effects of prolonged exposure to radiation, a mysterious force she had spent decades studying and harnessing. In those early days, the dangers of radioactivity were unknown. Marie and Pierre handled glowing uranium and radium with bare hands, breathing in dust and fumes inside drafty, poorly ventilated labs. Protective gear? Non-existent. They lived literally surrounded by invisible radiation, a silent killer. At the time, it was all about the thrill of discovery, the possibility of unlocking the secrets of nature and revolutionizing medicine. But by the 1920s and 30s, Marie's health began showing signs of wear. She suffered from severe fatigue, persistent infections, and painful skin lesions that doctors couldn't explain. It took decades for scientists to connect these symptoms to radiation poisoning, but Marie's body was already paying the price. Still, she rarely spoke of her ailments publicly, carrying on with the same relentless drive that had defined her entire life. Every setback was met with the same stubborn refusal to give up. During World War I, she turned her energy to serving her country, developing and personally driving mobile X-ray units, nicknamed Little Curies, to the battlefields, enabling doctors to diagnose injuries quickly and save countless lives. She trained young women to operate the machines, breaking social conventions and empowering a new generation. Yet, the irony was bitter. She was healing others while her own body was silently being destroyed by the very radiation she'd worked with for years. Her daughters watched this toll firsthand. Irene, following her mother's footsteps, became a scientist and shared Marie's passion and tenacity. Eve, the younger daughter, chose to become a writer and guardian of her mother's legacy, documenting both her brilliance and her suffering with unflinching honesty. As Marie aged, the weight of her achievements grew heavier alongside the physical toll. In 1934, at the age of 66, she succumbed to aplastic anemia, a condition linked directly to radiation exposure. She passed quietly, away from the glare of the media, her body marked by the very forces she had spent a lifetime unraveling. But even in death, Marie Curie's story refused to fade. Her papers and notebooks remain radioactive to this day, sealed in lead-lined containers, ghostly reminders of the price she paid for knowledge. Years later, her legacy was cemented in the most permanent way possible. In 1995, Marie Curie became the first woman ever to be interred in the Pantheon in Paris purely on the basis of her own accomplishments. It was a long overdue recognition, a final victory in a life marked by breaking barriers, fighting prejudice, and redefining what it means to be a woman in science. Her discoveries transformed the world. Radium and polonium not only changed scientific understanding, but also revolutionized medicine, paving the way for cancer treatments that save millions. She shattered the glass ceiling of her era, inspiring generations of women to pursue science despite societal obstacles. Marie Curie's story isn't just about elements and Nobel Prizes. It's about unyielding curiosity, heartbreaking sacrifice, and a legacy so powerful that it continues to light the way for dreamers and rebels around the world.